Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's segment of Master Speak. First thing first, I hope all the listeners tuned in today and their loved ones are healthy and doing safe. And I hope you are continuing to take necessary precautions and ensuring that you don't let your guards down when you go out about your daily routines. Now, let's give us a thumbs up by pressing the like button if all is well at your end. Tell us which city or town you have logged in from. It'll be interesting to know. As always, where our audience is joining us from. Make sure that you tag your colleagues, friends, and anyone you want for them to join this session with us. And lastly, don't forget to keep your comments and questions coming through the session. The two lucky questions, as always, will be rewarded with Amazon gift vouchers. So make sure that you stay with us till the end of the session. Keep your questions coming, and who knows who's going to be the lucky winner for today's segment. Last but not the least, you can find all our recordings of the previous sessions on our website, social channels. So do make sure that you find some time to browse through those sessions. They're all gems out there. Make sure that you take time out and see what catches your interest. Now, for today's segment, we have invited one of the most respected and admired professional in the creative space in the country. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Santosh Desai, Managing Director and CEO of Future Brands Limited. Now, before taking up this assignment, Mr. Desai was the president of McCann Erickson, one of the India's leading premier advertising agencies. A postgraduate from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, his interest lies in studying and evolving nature of consumer culture in India. He wears two hats, one of an authoritative voice in matters relating to brands and consumers, and the other as social commentator, making sense of complex changes India is undergoing. He has also been writing a weekly column in the Times of India for over 16 years, and I have been one of his ardent admirers, always waiting for his column to appear. Nuggets of wisdom out there. I am very happy to be in conversation with Santosh today, and we're going to talk about branding in digital world and to know how to have engaging conversation in ever evolving world and how to deepen relationship between brands and consumers in this digital world. So with that, I would like to thank Santosh for joining us today. Santosh sir, thank you very much for joining us. It's absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Rakesh. It's a truly a privilege to be here. My pleasure entirely, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
So we are all ears. Our audience are eager to waiting to listen to you, Mr. Desai. So,
Right.
so
Thank you so much, Rakesh. Just give me a second. I'll just put on the presentation that I have, which I will share. Yeah. I'll continue now. So as we were saying that we know about this. We know about the fact that the digital world is all around us. We know the language that is there. We know that the fact that democratization has taken place, that it is collaborative, that today influencers are a very important part of the ecosystem. So it's not an unfamiliar subject. Next slide, please. But I would still argue that for all the thrall with which we behold change, and we talk about the fact that there is a big change happening, we tend to underestimate its sweeping power. Bill Gates is fond of saying that we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short run and underestimate its impact in the long run. And I think something like that also is true for digital. Much as we talk about the kind of changes that we are seeing, we still don't fully appreciate, I would argue, the full extent of the changes that digital brings about in many different aspects of our life. And I want to just spend a little time talking about these. Next slide. To my mind, the key thing to remember is that the digital world and social media are not media evolutions. We think of them as an evolution over, you had print, then you had television, and now you have digital. But they are social revolutions. And I think unless they are seen as social revolutions, and unless they are understood as social revolutions, the corresponding kind of changes we need to make in all other aspects of our life, be it marketing, be it business, be it politics, be it entertainment, we will not respond adequately if we do not fully appreciate the fact that what we are seeing right now is nothing less than a social revolution. Next slide. The problem with the world of brands is that it is still deeply rooted in the assumptions of an earlier time, and therefore resists attempts at fundamental change. And this is, and I will, give you some examples as we go forward of how deeply embedded are old models that we follow today, which makes it that even when we, on the surface, adopt new methods, on the surface, we are alive and awake to the new world. Even now, how we perhaps do not fully appreciate the extent to which things need to change fundamentally. Next slide. Therefore, the brands of the world, I argue, will need to be evolved around a new mental model, not just of themselves, but the world that they live in. So it's almost like going back to basics and rethinking the basic concepts. Targeting, what is a brand? What does a brand look like? What is it really? I mean, how do you understand a brand? Beginning from there is a need to rethink the concept of brands. And we'll talk about how to do that. The next slide, please. So we'll just do a deeper exploration, and what we will do is that we'll use a somewhat unfamiliar kind of a frame to look at the kind of changes that we are seeing. One way of getting insight into anything is to look at something which is very familiar. Like in this case, we are all familiar with digital. Look at it in an unfamiliar way. Make the familiar unfamiliar, and then make it familiar again. Because what it allows us to do then is, what happens is that when something is familiar, we begin to take it for granted. We stop really seeing it. We stop really appreciating how significant it is. For instance, the fact that today, that on our devices, we can, download all the music ever that is recorded virtually. We can have access to it. If you're not downloading, if you're just streaming it, we have the capacity. I grew up in a time when we used to hunt for, music, where to get an LP, we used to go and get it recorded, transfer it into a tape. The idea of having a music collection was such a difficult task. And how casually it is that we can today accept the fact that, the entire music of the universe, if I wanted to listen to something, what is happening in Africa right now, I can do it. Over a period of time, we become blasé. We become because it becomes familiar, and we stop seeing the degree to which it actually is radical. So we will go on a little journey, somewhat far away from the world of marketing. To my mind, the most important change that has taken place, which we need to take note of, is that the dominant media form has changed. There was a time when print was the dominant media form, then television became the dominant. I grew up certainly when I joined the business. Advertising was, I joined it in the mid 80s when television opened up in India, and so I, in a sense, have worked in it for many years at a time when television was the dominant medium. And today, what we are beginning to see, and in fact, more or less have seen, is how the dominant media form has changed into digital. But when media changes, a lot of things changes. Next slide, please. Why is media so important? Why is media so central to our lives? What is media? Media are technologies that immortalize the mind and its output. They make thoughts alive and imperishable. What is a medium? A medium is a place which holds our thoughts. What is a book? A book or a newspaper or a magazine are places where whatever are the products of our mind, they get recorded. They get held there. They become a repository of that knowledge, that insight, that information. A medium is a way of storing it, of allowing it to circulate, of transmitting it. And that's what it does. It makes thoughts alive and in most cases imperishable. Once that knowledge is trapped and and we distill that knowledge for all times to come, we will have that knowledge. It allows for, therefore, storage, transmission, recirculation, and multiplication of ideas. So what ideas are in vogue at any given point in time in history are a function of what medium holds those ideas. Every time the medium changes, not the ideas change in a little way, our norms change, our customs change, everything changes. And let me just illustrate that by going back even further in time. So Marshall McLuhan, who's a media theorist, says this: we become what we behold. We shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. His most famous, of course, line that everybody uses is the idea that the medium is the message. What he's really trying to say is that what the tools that we use, the instruments that we use, are not just innocent. What happens is that we use them, and then they shape us and change us in some ways. And we'll just talk about how. Next slide. So when dominant media change, they help change everything else. Everything in the world changes when the dominant medium of a time changes. And this is something that, as a pattern, we perhaps don't adequately acknowledge how widespread, how sweeping this change can be. Next slide. So if we go back in time, before the print era, before there was printing, after all, the printing press is a product of medieval times. Gutenberg and the printing press is something that happened in the 16th century, if I remember rightly. If you look at a time when there was no written word, was not the dominant form of communicating with people. In an oral society, what is most important is the idea of creating memory. Why is it that, for instance, our Vedas, our Puranas, a lot of them were essentially oral, and they have been transmitted orally. How do we know that? Because of the fact that we chant things. How do you create memory in a time when there is no device to record memory? By creating devices like rote memory. Why is it that in schools till recently, till a couple of generations ago, we learned pahadas, by rote, ek, ekam, ek. Why do we do that? Because how do you create memory when there is no other way of hanging on to knowledge? So in an oral culture, memory, creation of memory is very crucial, because otherwise every generation has to start all over again. Repetition, therefore, is very important. It's interesting that when we are speaking, like I am doing right now, we always speak with emotion. I'm gesticulating, right? Even though we are not face to face, I cannot help it. When I'm speaking, I have to use a certain amount of emotion to communicate what I'm doing. I'm seeking participation. In this case, I cannot make eye contact, but in the real world, we are constantly seeking acknowledgement. We are trying to make eye contact. Always communication is a very visibly sort of a two-way street. And there is an underlying sort of a unity, the sense that, we all are part of a community. In oral cultures, a very strong sense of community that is shared that on the basis of the spoken word. There's the absence of authorship. Who does an idea belong to? Because everyone is able to talk about, so ideas become communally owned. They become community ideas. And non-linearity is the instinct. See, whenever we speak, we always ramble a little. So for instance, if we were to do a transcription of what I just said, while you are listening to me, it may seem that it is reasonably coherent. But if you were to look at the transcription of what I'm saying, you would see it is grammatically off. I will start sentences and then veer off and say something else. I'll say, I'll hesitate. All the kind of things that, so it will meander. It will meander. You see, in fact, if you look at the kind of discourses that, say, the preachers give, you will always find that the way of giving a discourse is you will start making a point and then you will go and illustrate it and go into a rambling story. Then you will come back to that point. So you always find that the structure of narratives in oral societies is not a straight linear structure. It's not logical and sequential necessarily. There is logic, but of a different kind. Also in oral cultures, because memory and the past is so difficult to hang on to, huge respect for age, there are very conservative instincts because you are constantly fighting to keep the past alive. So oral societies have a certain, by virtue of being where the main means of transmitting ideas is the spoken word, there is a culture that evolves. So it's not just about a medium, it's about an entire culture. What happens when we move, the next slide, please? when we move to a world where things are, are written, or the print world. It's interesting. Print operates by separating our senses. So we are always writing. We write retrospectively, right? We write after an event. We don't write while things are happening. We speak while things are happening. But when we are writing, it's always after the event. And we are cool, we are dispassionate, we are removed from the heat of the moment when we record something. So it's retrospective, it is logical, there is sequencing, there is organizing, it values the authoritative, the objective. The idea of expertise becomes important. Who's saying it? Therefore, the reverence for books, the fact that somebody has said this and put this down, because at that time getting published was not easy. So the reverence for books, for expertise, for debate and discussion, and knowledge accumulation made very easy because you had a way of storing knowledge. So print cultures have a certain systematic, sequential, logical kind of a bias to it, and they explore ideas in very, very kind of systematic ways. It's interesting how this reflects itself in something. Next slide, please. I mean, it's a very different kind of example, but these are two pictures of traffic in two different countries. I would argue that the one on the left that you are seeing is classically what oral cultures, how they think, how they talk, how they organize themselves. It's like a conversation. It's like in India, when we are conversing with other people, we interrupt people all the time, because in our oral culture, nobody sees anything wrong with cutting in and saying something even while somebody else is speaking. You look at the picture on the right, it's a print culture. It's sequential, it's order. There is one organizing principle. Here, it's every person for themselves. On the left side, there's a different notion of order here. And here, there's a completely on the right, the fact that there are rules, you follow rules, it's a very orderly, sequential, systematic kind of a view of a system like traffic. It's interesting how, and you will see this in the way cities are organized. You look at European cities, you will see a certain symmetry. You go to traditional Indian cities and you will not see that. You will see much more organic, much more community kind of a sense. So it's interesting how the point I'm making is that something like a medium, what you think is just about a small part of our lives, how central it is in shaping so many different aspects of our lives. Next slide, please. And television, when it comes, look at the logic of television. Television is about transience, right? Television, there is no memory possible. You can't rewind. You can't go back 3 pages to see, what was just said there. Everything is in the perpetual present. Everything is happening. Everything is happening. And so your attention has to be riveted, because if you are not paying attention, you lose it forever, right? Now you have the ability to record things, but for most of its life in television, it was about transience. And television speaks to a very superficial part of us, relatively. So it's about desire, it's about what is currency, what is popular. In a television culture, celebrities are a product of television because they are in our homes. There are all these images that are attractive, and we are drawn to images that are attractive. It's a kind of simulates reality. It's a torrent of electronics bombarding the senses, and it's almost like our eyeball is the master. It's what we are reacting to. It's not through the full extent of our mind. We are not, unlike in a print. So when we read a book, we are absorbing something. We are reacting to something. We have time to mull over things. You don't have television does not allow for introspection, reflection. You are swept away by the narrative, and therefore a culture that television creates is very strongly a consumption culture, because it is about desire, it is about wanting things, it's about valuing images, because that's the nature of television. Next slide. What happens when we enter a digital world? And so what happens when you have something which is both at a certain level television and print? It has text, it has images, but it has many other capacities. It is a diary, it is a medium, it is a marketplace, it is an archive, it's a library. You look at digital and it's very difficult to summarize digital in the way that you can perhaps summarize television or print. because it is a profoundly sort of different kind of a, although it draws from existing forms, its capabilities are profoundly different. And therefore, if we can acknowledge the fact that every time a medium changes, very profound changes happen, then we have to acknowledge that when something as significant as digital happens, as sort of a radical in its capabilities as digital happens, surely the world will change in even more dramatic ways than it has changed in the past. Next slide. So the internet is almost, think of the internet, it's an alternative universe, right? It's like a new realm. It's like we have an offline realm, which is the physical realm, and now we have opened up this entire universe, which is infinite, which is unbounded. What are the boundaries of the infinite of the internet? How many pages are there in the internet? It is a world without maps. There are no neighborhoods in the internet. You can't say that turn right after Google and you will find Facebook. I mean, there is no concept of geography on an internet. It is just absolutely, it is like a universe. It is infinite and expanding. It is navigated by curiosity rather than effort. It's so therefore, which is the amazing thing about the internet, is that we can, in all this universe, by just asking the question, we can go exactly to the place where we want to. Or by putting in a URL, we are able to navigate to precisely where we want to go. It is navigated by curiosity. I can ask an open-ended question, which is what I do of Google, and it gives me answers, unlike anything else in the past. The user here is the creator who also becomes the user. So usage adds to the internet rather than subtracts. You can't remove things. You can only add things to the internet. So it is actually quite a fascinating construction. Next slide, please. So the digital mode is again, we know this. It's individual minds connected and multiplied in the here and now. Therefore it's democratic because it allows everyone to have a voice, which is unprecedented. Again, let's acknowledge how unprecedented it is for all of us. Sorry, go back, please. To have a voice. You go back in an earlier time, on television, you don't have a voice. The viewer does not have a voice. There is no way that the viewer feedback is available. On print, in a newspaper, you would have 3 letters to the editor every day. That's the space given for the reader's views. Nowhere, never before in history, has it become possible for every individual to be a broadcaster. To that kind of a voice and the kind of empowerment is staggering. I mean, there is no parallel to it. It's collaborative because everything is additive. We can all work together. Everything is kind of, it is the collective efforts of people that build the internet. Facebook, for instance, if you think about Facebook, what is Facebook? It's like a diary, a blank diary. I mean, in its basic conceptual form, it's a diary on which all of us, a journal on which all of us write our thoughts. What makes it powerful? The fact that it is connected, the fact that it is instant, the fact that it's like a public kind of a place where we are able to connect with each other, share, what our feelings are, what new things are happening with us, and therefore it creates a community of a completely different kind. It's connected and it's simultaneous because everything happens together. It's not, things don't have to happen in sequence. In fact, it's interesting that there's a theorist called Ong who says that it's like the oral culture. It's like the oral culture of a new kind. It's interesting. What he's talking about is the fact that it's on the internet. We write not in an earlier mode. When we wrote formally. Now on the internet, we write like we speak. So therefore, the texting, the whole emoji kind of a culture, the language that you use, say, on a Snapchat or an Instagram, they're all forms, or WhatsApp. They're now, what is happening is that all these other modes of communicating are all merging and are becoming one kind of a internet and digital way of communicating, which is a new language virtually that we are finding to communicate. Next slide, please. And the other interesting thing about the internet and the digital mode is the fact that the increasing focus on the mind. The internet is nothing but a vast playground of the mind. I mean, if you think about technology and you say, what is technology in history? When you say technology, what do you mean? In an earlier time, technologies were really about overcoming the limitations of the body. If you look at what we call technology, what were machines? What was technology? It was the fact that we had constraints of space and time. We had only X amount of strength every individual had. What did technology do? It bolstered those capabilities. So a steam engine had a pulling power that individuals could never have. An aeroplane took you, and made you travel at speeds and over distances that you could possibly not have been able to, travel. A telegram crunched time. So crunching space and time, augmenting of physical capabilities was what technology was always about. And if you think about it, one of the central problems of human beings is the fact that we have this absolutely sophisticated, kick-ass mind that is trapped in this utterly inept body. We have this really, really, if you look at our bodies, it is capable of so little, and our mind is capable of so much. What the technology today is doing is it is unleashing the power of the mind, not just as at an individual level, but by collectively connecting that mind and to everybody else's. And that is such a radical shift that we are seeing. The fact that you move from the technologies of the body to the technologies of the mind. Next slide, please. So that's what it is. The new meaning of technology is from overcoming the limitations of the body to multiplying the power of the mind. And which is why communities are so important, which is why connection is so important, because this is why, and if you look at all the kind of progress that we are making, in so many ways it is about the fact that we are finally being able to harness the full power of the mind, not just the mind but the collective mind. Next slide. And the body, it's interesting, is how it become recreational. It's almost vestigial. It's almost, I always find it interesting that when we use a phrase like working out, we used to work because our bodies were our only machine that we had. In an ancient time, we worked because the only machine and the only instrument we had was the body. Today, because the body doesn't need to do any work, we have to work out. We have to take our body for a walk. So when we say I'm going for a walk, what are we doing? We are actually accompanying our body for a walk. Because if we did not work out, if we did not exercise, if we did not go to the gym, our body would rot. Because we don't use our bodies. Because that's what has happened. Technology has given us so many physical capabilities now that the body is not the site of action as much as the mind is. Next slide, please. And the mind has, on the other hand, been set free. It's been harnessed, it's been connected, it's been detached from the body, and it's moving towards almost an independent existence. When we look at AI and ML, what are we doing is we are actually setting the mind free. Next slide. So, if you were to look at now, what are all of these concepts, if you were to look at them in human terms, what is the internet? The internet is the mind multiplied. Actually, that's what the internet is. It's you're multiplying the power of the mind. What is an algorithm? An algorithm is a mental process that is automated. So what would have otherwise been a process that you're using in your mind, what you do is you locate it outside and you automate it. What is data? Data is the imprint of our thoughts and actions which are captured permanently. Again, unprecedented that everything that we do on the internet is potentially recordable for eternity. No individuals were not important enough. What we did was not important enough. Today, everything, whoever you are on the internet, data is nothing but the fact that it's the imprint that is left behind by what we do, whatever we do on the internet. And that allows, therefore, that kind of information where every individual becomes important. Again, at no time in history has every individual been important. There were the masses. We always refer to the masses. And then there are the special people. Today, everybody is special to that extent, and that changes everything. It certainly changes marketing, as we'll talk about. When every individual becomes possible to track, to understand, to cater to, and in a full kind of a sense, never before possible. What is Internet of Things? Are things that think. What you're doing is you're taking intelligence, and instead of it being located in sentient people only, people who have cognition, we are locating in now intelligence in things, in inanimate things. So you're taking the power of the mind and breathing the power of the mind into things that are inanimate. When wearable technology comes, now you're taking the body, which is a physical piece of machine, and making it both sensate, you're giving it sensors, and you're giving it intelligence. So it's interesting how what you're doing with the mind, you're infecting the world in a sense more and more with the power of the mind. And AI eventually is when the mind is set free from the body and it exists outside the body with all the consequences, positive and scary, that entails. That is really the kind of shift that we are seeing. Again, radical fundamental shifts that we are seeing. Next slide, please. And if you look at, therefore, the mind, the new source of wealth today is ideas create value. Ideas create wealth. That's why some of the most valuable companies today are companies that did not exist 25 years ago. And all of them are the power of ideas. I mean, what is Google? I mean, on the face of it, Google is a box, an empty box, with one search query possibility. That is the interface. It's more and more. There was a time when, if you go back in time, labor was the source of wealth and power. Whoever had the largest army won the world. Then capital became the source of wealth and power. Today, increasingly, it is ideas. Capital is cheap if you have the ideas. You can get capital. You can get labor if you need labor. But what really is the kind of dynamo, the engine that drives the world today is the power of ideas, the power of the mind. Next slide, please. And so I've talked about it. The power of data. Along with that is the permanent imprint that we leave behind. It's the idea that the self is additive. It's possible to make coherent sense of every individual, which is what today algorithms are doing. They're trying, because they are able to read all of our actions, they understand potentially more about us than we do. We are not conscious of why we feel or how we respond to things. I don't know, for instance, how I respond to something, the color yellow, or whether, I don't understand that. But if sufficiently large number of data points are available, then it becomes possible for a program to discern and that I respond a little better to this versus that. Something that I would never be able to understand about myself. But it becomes possible for individuals to be understood with that degree of precision. Next slide. And therefore, we are seeing are new imaginations and new vocabularies. So, which is why we are talking about moving from notions of, the most powerful, therefore, idea in business today are platforms and ecosystems, because they are places that allow other people to connect and harness their minds and interact with each other and create opportunities. And therefore, it's interesting that Facebook has no content of its own. Google has no content of its own. They don't have, assets of that kind. What they're giving is room for people to come together and use their sort of understanding, using their content creation ability to build these massive businesses. The other big change that is happening, and I'll talk a little more about this because I think it's very interesting, is the idea that we are moving from notions of stock, fixed things, to everything is becoming more of a flow and a stream. And we are seeing this in so many different ways. We are moving from a world of fixed nouns to fluid verbs. Everything is a verb. Be texting, mailing. If you look at the way we describe all our activities, it's more and more and more liking something. You don't just like something, but liking is an action, which is on Facebook. It's sharing. It's all of it is a very repetitive sort of a notion of doing things. So it's earlier, for instance, if you liked food, you were a connoisseur. You described it in nouns. You were an aesthete. You were a connoisseur. You were a gourmand. Today, you are a foodie. It's very interesting when you use the word foodie. It's such a more active, more kind of a vibrant kind of a sense of somebody who does the same thing, who enjoys food. But the pursuit becomes a much more fluid kind of, like I said, work. This is a world of ceaseless upgrades, when nothing is static, where you will get any technology will get upgrade, any software will get an upgrade. We are constantly moving up and upgrading things. We are moving from closed systems to open systems, open systems are collaborative. Open systems acknowledge the fact that the world keeps changing and that you keep building and adding. So of course, Wikipedia is the world's sort of, is the classic open system kind of an example. But more and more and more, as we will see some examples for brands also going forward, we are seeing, more and more things are being imagined as open systems. And like we talked about, intelligence is being embedded in many more different places. So we are moving, this whole social kind of a revolution is resulting even in business terms, even in closer home. We are beginning to see very big shifts that are taking place. Next slide, please. And so if I just spend a little time on this shift from a stock orientation to a flow orientation, when we've talked about, and this has been talked about, usership to ownership, it's interesting. Implicitly in the past, we've always imagined that consumption is about ownership. We want to own things. We want to own clothes. We want to own cars. That's what consumption is. It is, more and more, of course, some usership, but largely about ownership. Today, increasingly, that idea is not the default idea anymore. If you want to avail of a facility, you don't need necessarily to own the object. You don't need to own the asset. And if you look at all our old ideas in our life, are ideas which are stock-based ideas. The kitchen is a stock. We use a fraction of the things in a kitchen on any given meal that we have in our kitchen. It'll be an absolute fraction. But we need all of that because who knows what we will need at any given point in time. Look at our wardrobes. And in COVID times, in fact, it has become very clear that when we look at our wardrobes and I look at those shirts and all those things and saying, what in the world for? Why do I have so many clothes? But because at any given point in time, we wear only one set of clothes. And but our mental model of consumption has been stock oriented. So the newspaper is a stock idea. The idea of, as against a timeline, a 24-hour moving timeline of news that we see today. The old idea of a newspaper is the fact that you stock up news for 24 hours and it becomes a little repository of news. Similarly, the home is a collection of objects. An photo album is a collection of memories. But the underlying change that is happening is that this, from an interest in an accumulated past, and so therefore success was about more accumulation. I have accumulated more objects. My house has more assets. Increasingly, it is moving to an ever-flowing present. And I think this has profound implications for marketing and branding. The idea that more and more, it's not about accumulating the past, but it's about what you do in the here and now, every minute of the day. How are you spending time? It's the streaming view of the world. Our lives are being streamed today, more and more, rather than an old idea of our lives being sort of adding up. Here we are thinking of things on a day-to-day basis, and we are streaming our lives. How does marketing respond to that kind of a shift? Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm just, for those who are interested in this whole subject of the big changes. There's an interesting book called The Inevitable. Kevin Kelly, who's a technology theorist, who talks about 12 drivers of change. If this presentation is circulated, you can take a look at it. It would take far too much time to go through each of these, but just I wanted to share it with you for those who are more interested in this subject. Next slide, please. Now, coming to brands. Now, if this is the world, in a very, very significant way, a completely different kind of a world, if this is what we have, is the picture that we are painting of the new reality, what does it mean for the world of brands? What does it mean? The brand, there is a fundamental disconnect here. The brand is imagined as a centrally controlled transmission. That's what the idea is. The brand is a citadel. It is the heart of what you do. And even the classic definitions include things like an inventory or a repository of images, associations, properties around your product or service. That's the classical definition. One of the many ways in which people have defined brands. Historically, the brand drew its power from its ability to make people listen and act. It had the power because broadcast was limited. So if I could get into any broadcast form, I had the power to make you listen. I would intrude. Advertising was nothing but the ability to barge into people's homes and their lives. When they were doing something interesting, we would barge into their homes and lives and say, okay, now listen to me instead. That's what advertising has been. Consumers, in fact, were seen as interlopers. I mean, if you look at, for most part, and I'll talk a little more about this. Consumers were outside the system. The brand was imagined as being owned by the company, and companies and the consumer lay outside that system. Next slide, please. And in fact, I would argue, I would go so far as to say, and this is something that is can be challenged by people, but I would go so far to say my experience working with so many different marketing companies is that actually historically companies talked a lot about consumer centricity, but actually consumers were despised by brands. Either they were despised or they were feared. Look at the way that we interacted with consumers in the past. You did consumer research. I mean, I've been to so many consumer research where you're sitting inside, another room, and you've got this closed circuit TV, and you are asking consumers things about their lives, and you are sitting and taking notes as if there are some strange animals on the other side. It's almost that distance that we put. We don't trust ourselves as marketers to freely interact or understand consumers. We have to, make them research objects for us to have any interaction with consumers. When any customer service complaint, it was always a grudge complaint. I mean, it was the consumer interactions were never, you were made to go to the market. The good companies were the ones who, mandated the fact that you had to spend 1 or 2 days in a month in the field. Left to themselves, marketers would not do that. They would like to sit in their centralized kind of spaces and to pontificate on the world. So actually, much as marketing talks about consumer centricity and how consumers are important, the truth of the matter is that marketing has always been, I was being charitable, has conducted itself at an arm's length from consumers. If I was being realistic, I would say that they have been either terrified or have disliked consumers. So I think that has been the past kind of an experience. Next slide, please. How does this have to change? How do we imagine? What is the conceptual framework that we use if you were to look at brands of the future? How do we sort of recalibrate, reimagine? And so I'm going to run you through, several dimensions of this, of a new kind of view on brands. Next slide, please. The first, as a metaphor, I would say the brands should be thought of as rivers, not lakes. The traditional view of the brand has been that it is something with a fixed boundary. In fact, that's why, and you are patrolling the fences. So as brand managers, in fact, the very often people were called guardians of the brand. You are brand guardians, which I find very interesting use of language, because you have to guard, you have to protect, you have to make sure that the sanctity of the brand was not violated. And these are all phrases that have been used. I have used several times over the years to talk about and understand the brand. That there is a timeless essence of the brand. This needs to be protected. This needs to be built. We are the people who are building it. We are the people who are protecting it. So it's a sort of either a citadel or a lake was the mental model of the brand. Today, in a world which is flows, which are streaming, where things are changing, where things are fluid, brands need to be imagined as rivers, not lakes. They need to be free-flowing. They are constantly moving. They're constantly responding to stimuli. Next slide, please. It's a wonderful, old quotation. Heraclitus has said this: "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." And I think this is so profoundly true for today's time. You never step into the same river, right? You never interact with the same brand twice. Something about it changes. Something about it gets modified by your interaction with the brand. That's an open system. That's a brand which is inviting, which is feeding off from consumers rather than fearing consumers. It is inviting consumers inside and using consumers and their responses to shape itself. That's the power of the brands today. The mental model has to shift from and yet, if you were to think about rivers, while they're changing all the time, you never step into the same river twice. The Ganga is still the Ganga. The Ganga and the meaning of the Ganga hasn't changed through millennia. So that's the exactly how you would want the brand to be. The brand has a certain quality that you respond to, that there is a certain relationship with consumers that it maintains while being responsive on a day-to-day basis to all the changes that consumers are going through, the context is going through, competition is going through, the opportunities that are coming your way, while being alive to all of those. How do you also while respond to and look at change? Next slide, please. And you will see many examples of this, right? So whether it's Tesla, the open source, the fact that it is, has that thrives on open source. I mean, it's a very small part of what Uber does, the kittens and many other programs of this kind. But the fact that they have this program where they would have kittens come to you and you could pet them, the fact that you are able to allow that room, or of course the oft quoted example of the Google Doodle, from a time when you thought of your identity as being sacred and as being, completely inviolate, to now when you are able to think of, the fact that you're able to play around with it, that you are able to, allow the events of every day to shape, your basic identity. I think it's a very sort of profoundly kind of significant way of communicating the fact that you are a river rather than a lake. Next slide, please. The other, of course, is the fact that brands are not company owned but community owned, and I think this has been spoken about a fair amount. So I won't sort of belabor the point, but it is true that today increasingly this is the fundamental shift that has happened. The fact that brands are today located in communities, they are organic products of community interactions, and therefore we must acknowledge that, work with that, and find ways of both thinking of and acting of a brand through a community filter. Next slide, please. And the traditional marketing I would characterize as hit and run marketing. It's a wide spectrum broadcast marketing, where you don't know who you are speaking to, so you're kind of, and therefore every time you're looking for new consumers, because that is hit and run marketing, because you don't know who you're speaking to. So you may do very fancy psychographic sort of segmentation, but you have no way of figuring out, whether media is aligned to that psychographic segmentation. So the fact of the matter is that you were shooting in the dark, and there was no option but to keep looking at that's why advertising is so popular, because advertising is the most sort of easy form of hit and run marketing. Broadcast, wide spectrum broadcast, hope that you attract a bunch of people, versus relationship building with individuals, which is now possible now, which was not possible earlier in the same way. But therefore, that is the new opportunity, the fact that you know so much more about individuals and can build relationships. Next slide, please. And so, for instance, OnePlus is a great example of a community-based brand, a brand which actually flouted so many kind of existing sort of rules and a highly desirable brand based on the fact that it creates a community that has learned, that values that brand and is built entirely on the back of that community. Ashish, can we play this video?
The favorite moment is when I got the invitation. It was at 2 a.m. My roommate was sleeping. I woke him up. Hey, bro, I got the invite. The phone is coming in like 10 days.
When I got it, I was so excited. I was giggling like a little girl, like, Santosh is here.
Most memorable moment? It was when I opened the box, I suppose.
I remember when I received it, I was showing everyone, like, look at this packaging, look at the screen.
So I hope the OnePlus 2 will have a better lens. Optical image stabilization is the only thing I ask.
I think it will be again like with high-end specs. That's what I'm thinking all about right now.
The best thing about OnePlus is that they actually do talk to us and they do listen to us.
So it makes me feel like being a part of the whole company itself. first of the community. It's not like you've just bought a phone and then that's it, because there's the whole other thing surrounding it.
Ashish, I think we get the idea. We can move on. So I just wanted to I think it's an example all of us are kind of comfortable with and familiar with. So, but I think it just brings alive, I think this thought of a community-based brand, I think wonderfully. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yep. The other big shift that we are seeing is, the fact that consumers as producers, which of course, we know about. But I think the more interesting aspect of it is the fact that the emergence of consumption as a profession. I mean, if you were to look at one of the fastest growing categories of new professions, although it doesn't get acknowledged like that, we don't think of it like that, are all these influencers, all the people who are actually semi-professional consumers. Because that's what they're doing. They are telling us and teaching other people how to consume. They are guiding them. They are tastemakers. They are educators. And I think it's a fascinating development when consumption becomes a profession. In fact, when people say, in a world where where you'll have more AI, what are the new professions? One of the, to my mind, I think one of the most exciting professions that is going to come up is the idea of a professional consumer who is able, because there is so much choice, thanks to the internet, thanks to the fact that today anybody can be. So the first part of it are producers. So consumers can launch labels of their own. They launch food products of their own. With so much choice that is coming in, you need intermediate sort of consumers who come in and help guide. So therefore, the power of the unboxing video, for instance, or the power of the video review, and the fact that as they become such huge celebrities with such large numbers, is a testament to the fact that consumption is becoming more and more central to our lives, and we are taking it seriously enough to actually listen to professionals tell us about how to consume. And that's the other very interesting kind of a shift that we are seeing. Next slide, please. And so GoPro is a great example of of how a brand has been built, through by actually through content that has been created and through experiences that consumers have had. And I think it's entirely a product, therefore, of consumer experiences. There's a short video. Again, I'm not sure we need to run the entire video, Ashish, but if you can just run that.
Ready, guys?
Auxiliary enabled.
I'm pretty scared.
3, 2, 1.
See at the bottom.
Fire.
Super cool.
Ashish, we can, I think, we can stop this. The next slide, please. The other, I think, important thing to take note of in today's time is the fact that, we have to learn how to be managed by a brand rather than managing a brand. This idea, this illusion that we had in the past that, we are brand managers, we actually shape the brand. I think increasingly the brand is a organic kind of a product of a community and how it feels about, and it's a relationship about with consumers and communities. So that actually is how brands are increasingly built. They're owned by community. If we really acknowledge the fact that they're community owned and it's not just lip service that we are paying to it, then we must also simultaneously acknowledge the fact that We have to learn how to be managed by brands rather than believe that we are managing the brands. Learn how to speak and understand the impulse of the brand. And this is very important because in today's world, when so much is happening on social media in real time, every part of the brand, sort of a company and an organization, must be so steeped in the brand that they speak effortlessly in the language of the brand without a conscious kind of set of guardians who mandate as to how the brand should speak. It should be part of everyone's vocabulary. Next slide, please. And Red Bull is a great example again of the fact that this is almost a life of its own. This brand has taken on largely through activities, not through advertising, but the fact that they have actually cast their net wide and are one of the most vibrant kind of brands in this space today. Next slide, please. And that's what I mean. Taking that, saying that perhaps in a different way. We traditionally have always talked about brand building, right? It's a structure that we are building. I think today what we are actually talking about is dissolving the brand in everything that we do, so that everything that we do speaks in the voice of the brand. It's not about building. It's not building an edifice. It's not building a structure. It's actually about making everything so branded by dissolving the brand into the organization, into all interactions, so that the smallest interaction is you're sure that it kind of speaks in the voice of the brand. Next slide, please. And then one example of that is for instance, it's a sort of somewhat extreme example is how Diesel, in fact, had a lot of fakes, and how it actually had the kind of courage, if you like, of promoting fake Diesels. And then there's a small case study. I think I'll skip the video because unfortunately a lot of these videos are a little of slightly larger length, so that they take up time. But I think it's a great example of how, when you have that confidence in the brand, you are able to take the kind of liberties that you would otherwise traditionally no brand would do. Next slide, please. Next. And one of the big changes that has happened, along with everything else in the internet world, when I've talked about the verb, the fact about everything is fluid verbs, brands themselves need to be verbs, not nouns. It's about what brands do, not what they profess. Belief is great, but if it doesn't translate into action, it is meaningless. Next slide. And Spotify, for instance, again, the idea of taking the playlist and converting, and making it an everyday action, making it something that is located in your life, aligning it to whatever need you have. So you've taken a repository, again, a stock, which is what Spotify is at a certain level. It's a streaming product, but it gives you a whole range of possibilities. By converting it into playlists, what you have done is that you have made it specific. You have aligned it to specific individuals, to times of day, to moods, and given yourself, taken that same sort of a stock that everybody has and sliced it in a way that has made it extremely powerful. Next slide, please. And so, whether it is Spotify Wrap, relive your year in music, customize and interact based on your year. So again, the fact that the whole activity orientation, the fact that, you're verbifying sort of what would otherwise be a access to a library. Next slide. And again, we've talked about the fact that, not the idea of brand timeless essence, but what may allows you to participate, in a brand's, in the consumer's life. So that's what really you're moving from, instead of this idea of a timeless essence that the brand stands for, but a brand, what is your mode of participating in consumer's life? And I think there's a good example here. If you go to the next slide. If you can click on the video, I'd like to show this one.
Let's now talk Fortnite, shall we? It's the newest video game craze, spreading fast among kids, college kids, even celebrities.
Kids are nuts for this Fortnite.
Fortnite has taken over the gaming world, becoming the most streamed game on Twitch ever. But brands are left out of the action, either tweeting from the sidelines or paying big bucks for in-game sponsorships. So when Fortnite announced a new event called Food Fight between Team Pizza and Team Burger, Wendy's saw an organic weigh-in. We found out Team Burger stored their beef in freezers. And Wendy's doesn't do frozen beef. So we got on Twitch, chose a character with red hair and pigtails, dropped into the game, And instead of killing other players, we started destroying burger freezers. Again and again and again for 9 hours straight. We also declared our mission on Twitter, sending hundreds of thousands of gamers to Twitch to watch us play. And soon other players stopped killing each other and started killing burger freezers with us.
Hey, Wendy's, dude, let's go!
Top Twitch streamers took notice.
I saw a Wendy's stream over here, dude.
Oh, you smacking the burgers, freezers?
This shit's lit. This kind of stuff keeps the game fresh.
Thank you so much for coming to the stream, Wendy.
News outlets were talking about it. Even Twitch posted a highlight reel of Wendy's best freezer kills. Then, our own competitors showed us some respect.
Yeah, I think this one. Ashish. Yeah, we can. So I think it's again such a live example of how you sort of you are able to look at opportunities of a new kind and sort of to get inside a video game, taking your idea forward, the whole brand thought forward, and being able to sort of deliver it in such a interesting way. And the other big shift that we need to acknowledge is the fact that again, I grew up in a time when we were constantly looking at ways of unifying consumers. What unites people. What is the mindset that unites people. You are looking at either demographic. You are looking at ways of being able to cluster people. And I think increasingly now, what brands need to do is the opposite. Is what makes each consumer unique. How do you acknowledge the fact that everybody is different, and how do you understand and speak to that? And again, we see some interesting examples of it. Next slide, please. So whether it is the Snapchat Bitmoji, which is it's a mix and match option that lets you customize your virtual persona's clothing. Whether you have the A/B testing homepages on which is true not just of Netflix, many places where every homepage is unique to the individual thanks to the data that you have, and you're able to kind of align data to each individual. Next slide. And the other, I think, interesting way of looking at of brands and in this time is not just strong brands, but anti-fragile brands. Anti-fragile is an idea where which actually, how do you become stronger under attack? How that is an anti-fragile brand. A strong brand is that withstands attack or withstands pressure. Anti-fragile thrives on attack and on pressure. How do you actually convert attacks into, because in a social media driven world, attacks are the rules rather than the exception. You will come under scrutiny, you will come under attack. How do you construct a brand and imagine strategy in a way you're able to harness that to strengthen the brand rather than let it weaken? Next slide. So I think Lego is a great example. Classically a brand that should have become irrelevant in a digital world. It's fundamentally about something physical, and you would say that with more and more kids and people sort of spending time on a virtual medium, what is the role of something like Lego? But it's an amazing example of a brand that has managed to totally reorient itself philosophically. I mean, it's a digital imagination that they've used. It's not about using digital media well or using digital marketing well. It has turned around, in fact, its entire, the way in which it is, the communities that it has built, the fact that there are networks that it has built, that the way in which it invites people of a very wide kind of a variety to participate in this creating act, inviting consumers to work with designers. The consumers, when they create something, their rewards, and the fact that there are meaningful rewards that Lego gives to consumers for acts of creation, it's a totally kind of a transformed brand. Next slide. And Netflix is another example. Again, this is a Latin American example where I think a Brazilian example where what happens in a World Cup when nobody is going to look at Netflix, and so Netflix ran a campaign essentially asking people not to watch Netflix. And then again, their insight there was that it's a rule-breaking culture. And if you ask people not to watch Netflix, it'll just become part of the conversation, and it'll have the opposite effect. And a full-throated campaign asking people not to watch Netflix actually worked wonders for them. Again, interesting how a brand is able to kind of look at diversity, adversity, and turn it into genuine strength. Next slide. And I think I'll sort of end with this idea that one of the big opportunities in a world where there are concerns about sustainability, there more and more consumers are becoming far more conscious about the fact that they seek authenticity, they seek and they are demand of the brands to do something which is good. And I think we are seeing so many brands take on the purpose kind of a mantle, talk about purpose and brand purpose. And some of it is talk. Some of the brands are doing work that is meaningful. But I think the opportunity here conceptually is really to say, what is branding? Branding is about creating meaning. Yeah, you take something and you're able to add layers of meaning that makes it valuable. I think the big power of branding is the fact that you can have a resource pool where you don't use too much resource, but you create a very rich sort of a network of meaning around it. My favorite example of this, of course, is not a digital example. It's a very ancient example that is steeped in culture in India, which is the Rakhi. In Raksha Bandhan, we use the Rakhi. And I grew up in a time when it was a simple white string, which was the Rakhi, and look at the symbolic meaning on a very resource poor, where you have one thin string, right, which symbolizes so much, right? That, to my mind, is the power of branding. When you take resource poor sort of products, resource poor ideas, but put so much meaning around them that they become, valuable, and I think that is the great opportunity where marketing can play a meaningful role in creating a more sustainable, where you are able to, you have brands like Everlane, for instance, highly desirable brands, which are actually based on a very pared down sense of which are sustainable, which are looking at the world or Patagonia. You have brands that are imagining themselves in ways where the important thing is not consumption, is not the volume of consumption, but the value of meaning that you're able to attach to the brand. I'm going to sort of close here. Let me just sum up my thesis in very short terms, which is to say that I think that we all know that digital is the world that we live in, and that brands and marketing must respond to that. I think the purpose of the presentation today was to actually just go a little deeper into understanding the true nature of the new world that is digital. And we've only talked about some aspects of it. Politics has been transformed by digital. Society is being transformed by digital, and I think there are those aspects that are worth exploring. But I think when we look at it through the lens of branding, I think fundamentally so many of the assumptions of an earlier time have gone. We need to reinvent this discipline in many ways. There are, of course, some ideas that will continue to be relevant. The power of the idea, the power of creativity does not change in a new time. The need for human connection will grow as we become more technological, and I think any change will have a counterpoint to it. So I think it's not as if there is only one new discourse that will come, but I think it's very important to acknowledge the fact that what we are looking for and what we are looking at is a significant, dramatic kind of a reorientation of the meaning of branding, and I think we all perhaps need to sort of participate in that process together. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Santosh sir. It was absolutely fabulous listening to you. Very interesting session. I think for me, and I'm sure my audience would agree with me, it was like a masterclass in branding in the digital world. And I'm sure something that all of us may want to go back to. There was so much of content in there, such different lens that you provided for us to see brand marketing in the digital age. So message for you folks, please make sure that you go back to this presentation that you just heard today. There is so much of wisdom in there and so much of imagination that can unlock and very interesting perspective. Thank you very, very much, sir, for sharing so openly with us. There are so many thoughts that are emerging, but I think there's so many questions our audience have posted, so I won't disappoint them. I'll straight away jump into some of the questions in the time that we have with you. The first one is interesting one, Santosh. This is from Rajshri. It's more of a comment and a question. And Rajshri is saying that there is so much talk about technology today, and you sort of covered that so much in your presentation. Digital data and all sorts of artificial intelligence is touted to change every aspect of our lives. Marketing traditionally, Rajshri says, was a field of art and creativity, free flow of ideas and creating endearing content to connect humans at emotional level. So, you being a creative icon yourself, right? Doesn't this bother you? This whole the poetry is getting prisoner to algorithms. What's your view on that?
No, I think that's a fair point. I think it does. I mean, I think any thinking person will be both excited and terrified because of technology, right? Because I think any new idea, any new form, any new facility of this kind will do both. It'll allow us. I mean, there are I think creativity. The interesting thing about creativity is that it doesn't get bottled up. For instance, I am not necessarily everybody is, but I'm a great fan of TikTok. And I'm because I do believe that it has democratized creativity and it has shown us that people with it doesn't matter what means you have, it does the material in your everyday life can be such a rich starting point for creative production, right? So at one level I do believe that technology allows for new forms of creativity. So you may not think of the emoji as a very creative form, but any experiment with language is an interesting form of expanding the frontiers of self-expression. So I do think that it's not a simple situation where technology is killing creativity and is making it all mechanized and it's automated. That is also true. And I think that the danger currently is, and where I would agree with Rajshri, is the fact that, see, in the early days of this whole programmatic kind of buying and the fact that you have this new facility which is data, you tend to overcorrect and believe that will give you all the answers. But the fact of the matter is that is not differentiating. Everybody will has that facility, right? The fact that so what makes, say, for instance, the Wendy's example powerful is the fact that it's not the technology, it's the use of technology and the idea of the technology that makes it powerful. So I do acknowledge the fact that there are many things about the future and the fact that and to me, AI and machine learning is a terrifying idea. And I'll tell you, it's terrifying, and I've not covered that in the presentation, is because AI not only does things that much faster and better than human beings, but does it in a way that human beings cannot understand. So we are coming to a point where it solves problems in ways that the human brain cannot comprehend. It's a completely different way of approaching a problem, which means over a period of time, we may end up it becoming a black box where we just accept an AI solution simply because over the years we realize that it does it better than we do. To me, that's a terrifying idea. So I think creativity, independent thinking, all of these are ideas that will both get furtherance through technology and will get challenged by technology. So I'm not a technology sort of an optimist only, but the truth is that change of all kinds will be complex, will be multidimensional, and it's not a simple sort of a yes, no, better, worse kind of an answer. Unfortunately, it's a much more complicated than that. But I share some of the misgivings that are there in that question.
That's so true, Santosh. Santosh, you spoke of digital, in a way that it's a social revolution, and that's the way one should look at it. See an interesting question from Baljit. I'm jumping a few questions since we're on the context. And Baljit is saying that the audience aggregation at global level is a risk today. There was these platforms democratized everything for us, right? So from being a medium to express to fear of them becoming a medium to control and influence behavior in not so noble way. So in turn, we are becoming the products which these platforms are trying to monetize. What are your thoughts about it?
That's absolutely true. I mean, that's absolutely true. I think we are the products. and we, as people have said, anytime you get anything for free, then you're the product. I mean, there's no other way. There's no other business model that works. Nothing can be free. It can only be free if you are the product. And I think more than that, we're talking about. I mean, there are many other aspects of this that are worrying. The fact that and that I think are the many dichotomies of the internet. The fact that at one level it is democratic, at another level it seems to support tyrannies across the world. The fact that it is connected but it isolates you. So it's a vastly, it gives you a huge amount of human connection and it is hugely isolating. So you have the surveillance, which gives you so much security and it makes your life so much easy, but it makes you totally possible to control. And you eventually have gone back to a few corporations that seem to control everything. They have access to data of a kind that is scary. So again, we are moving into a world and the problem is that, the thing about technology is that there is an inexorable trajectory that technology has, which means that nobody seems to be able to control this. So for instance, I would argue that Twitter has destroyed politics in the world. I mean, that is, it's an extreme view, but there's nobody who, even if you were to acknowledge the fact that our discourse has been coarsened because of something like Twitter, there aren't very many ways of correcting that. So I do think that we run the danger, just as we have the advantages of it, of technology, we run the danger of becoming a compliant, controlled society. So in the name, and which is the strange thing, is that we will get to being controlled through the path of democracy, through the path of being empowered. So empowerment will not set us necessarily free eventually. Empowerment will create a new kind of a controlled environment. That is a possibility. The problem is that you are seeing some pushback. Say Europe, for instance, has been, I think, quite aggressive in sort of regulating, on issues like privacy. But the gap, and I do think that societies will respond. Right now, the pace of change has been so fast that it's been very difficult for societies to coherently mount a response to this. But I think as we go forward in time, this is, after all, we are just, barely we are not even on the ground floor of the digital world. So there's a long way to go. And I think we'll see both. We'll see, examples of control. We'll also see a pushback. Where it comes to rest, I think is anybody's guess.
Fair enough, sir. I will jump into a related question here from Anita. You mentioned about brands. Think of brands as rivers and not lakes, right? So, and you also spoke about brands dissolving themselves into every sphere of life, right? So, what Anita wants to know is that much is being spoken about the need for brands to be authentic, right? And at the same breath, we just discussed their concerns around data integrity in the zeal of personalization. So how do you suggest the brands balance this whole aspect of, availability of data around customers and still stay purposeful to the customers?
Yeah. So, I think these are related ideas, but there's also I just push them apart a little bit also. I do think that it is possible for brands to be authentic while sort of looking very hard at the data that is available to them. It is possible to do so. I think that the problem, I think, and the opportunity both are the fact that as consumers become more conscious about privacy, see, eventually, why have brands started talking about purpose? Not because brands are noble kind of creatures, that are, that brands, it's a marketing device, right? There was marketing device was, when 20 years ago, brands made something called super claims, where they made these ridiculously exaggerated claims on the efficacy of the product. That was all the rage because consumers allowed you to get away with it. Today, brands talk about purpose because there's a new breed of consumer that is looking at consumption in a much more critical lens. And therefore, brands are forced in some ways. And they realize that it is to their advantage to talk about purpose. If tomorrow privacy and data integrity becomes an issue, brands will willy-nilly have to find ways. I mean, for instance, Google does already make a point as against other large kind of big players about the fact that it has more respect for data than do some of the other social media giants. So I think it can potentially become a variable where brands have to prove and had to, from a consumer perspective, that they respect data integrity and they are able to draw boundaries. And because if consumers demand that, then I think there is a chance that brands will need to respond. But I think that the way in which the digital world is structured, and at a structural level, the fact that the data, so unless there is a regulatory sort of a pushback, which makes where data is not stored, where data is sort of forgotten, so to speak, we are likely to see this tension that is there in that question. So again, I think these are, like I said, early days. It will depend on whether there is social mobilization on these fronts, whether this becomes a consumer variable, B, a regulatory variable. I think these are things that could potentially limit issues like data integrity. And the third possibility is, which is something that I've always found interesting, is if data gets priced, and if consumers, for every time that data is used, if it was possible for consumers to get, if you like, a royalty of a kind, where it becomes, where therefore consumers have to agree to that data being used, and it becomes a model which is monetizable in some form. That's a kind of a free market kind of a view of how to handle something like this.
So one of the questions that I was expecting, in fact, I was expecting many questions on this topic, and rightly so, Santosh, is that this current situation that we are in now, the pandemic, the COVID-19, how do you see the landscape for brand communication changing from here? And in your judgment, what practices do you see disappearing or making an appearance as a result of changes being induced by this pandemic?
Yeah, so I of course, I think, there is a certain, I mean, if you look at, what does a pandemic do, is that it creates anxiety, it creates widespread fear. There is a need for authentic information. There is a huddling together in groups and in collectives, and you seek comfort in collectives. You also seek distraction. You seek because you are, kind of overwrought by anxiety. So, I mean, if you were to look at what this means, these are the kind of themes that emerge. At one level, you're looking for security, you're looking for integrity, you're looking for reassurance, and therefore the comfort of the familiar you're looking at. On the other hand, you're also looking for little islands and pockets of release and escape, because otherwise you're just surrounded by this kind of an anxiety. And so I think opportunities for brand communication are of two. One, of course, is immediately into the early days, into the pandemic. It's all about reassurance. It's all about sort of holding the fort, of having sort of the confidence and faith. So that becomes the kind of I think increasingly. But my view actually overall on the COVID situation is the fact that I think the resilience of of societies and human beings should not be underestimated. I think we will get to a point. I think change will happen on three dimensions. One is that what was already happening, what were already undercurrents or strong undercurrents, have become major forces. So one change is an amplification change. So digital was already a part of our lives, was taking a more and more important part of our life. Today, because of the pandemic, you are going to see much more digital adoption, not just in areas that were already being adopted, but also in areas which were relatively underpenetrated. So education is one, financial transactions is the other. You're going to see, so one is amplification. The other is reversal, and which I think is important to acknowledge the fact that, as you already see our behavior in today, for all the fear of COVID and the fact that we are having a surge, you go to the markets, you go to streets, and you see behavior that that you are shocked by, saying, what happened? Nobody seems to care anymore. So I think the fact is that we as human beings want social contact. So let's not underestimate the power. So there will be a lot of reversal of behavior, and in fact a reaction. So you will see a reaction to this. The moment there is a vaccine that is even slightly widely available, I certainly see a sort of a response to that. And the third level of change is, while reversal will happen in the short run, in the long run, we are going to see new attitudes towards consumption, frugality, things that we reacted to and we adopted in a reactive way because we were forced to. Some of that will become deeper, larger trends that we will see unfold over a longer period of time. So I think consumption will become more meaningful. Frugality will come in. There will be much greater sense of proactive health. There will be a much greater importance of financial, sort of having financial lump sums and having a nest egg. So I think I see change along these dimensions.
Thank you so much, Santosh. I think you've taken far more time of yours than we had budgeted for, but I guess there's one last question with your permission that I want to ask. So this one is from Snigdha, and the question is around the young professionals who are aspiring to build a career in marketing. How should they go about doing that, and what skills and experiences they should be focusing on to stay relevant and stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, see, look, let me answer this in a sort of a 30,000 feet way, because I think everybody is different, and I normally don't like prescribing anything to people. But I think the very important thing, I think, for people entering any field, but certainly marketing, is to have questions in your head. You must want to make sense of the world, and people with questions in their head, they are guaranteed the fact that they will always learn. People who have too many answers or think that they have too many answers are the kind of people who stagnate very easily, because they know, or they think they know, and they might know, but the world will change. So what they knew may not become relevant. If you have questions and you are pursuing questions, the question could be about anything. It could be about a category you're working on. It could be about how consumers and how they are likely to change. It's about technology. It's like some of the very interesting questions that have been asked by this audience today. But to me, the most important thing is the ability to have questions in your head and you to pursue those questions, to have empathy. The central skill of marketing is to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes and to be able to have empathy, because I think only when you have a sense of how other people think, how they feel, how they react, can you judge whether anything that you're doing is real, is likely to connect or not. And so empathy only comes if you had your share of experience. If you're open to experiences, you're open to being wrong. So, and finally, I would say, combine two things which are opposites at one level. Don't be afraid of your own subjectivity, but be very rigorous in challenging and questioning it. Your originality matters, your ideas matter, but unless you are really harsh and critical of yourself, unless you constantly are able to subject them to new inputs, new ideas, the danger is of becoming a sort of, you will become frozen in time and think you have the answer when the world is changing around you. So I think those are some of the very general things I would have to say on that subject.
Super. To my audience, I think you just heard it from the leading voice on marketing and brand communication, a stalwart in this area. And thank you so much, Santosh, for joining us today. It was an absolutely fantastic session. I loved every moment of it, and I'm sure our audience loved it as well. So a heartfelt thank and gratitude for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us, sir.
My pleasure entirely, Rakesh. And thank you very much to the audience also. Some wonderful questions. I enjoyed myself so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Take care and stay safe.
Okay. Bye-bye. You too.
All right. That brings us to the end of this show. We have overrun on the time, but I'm sure you found this extremely useful. I enjoyed it thoroughly, as I said. So time for me to pick up two lucky questions. Very quickly, think. Okay. So the first one goes to Rajshri, the first question and a comment. And the second one is to Baljeet. The question around are we becoming the product for the platform? So congratulations, Baljeet, and congratulations, Rajshri. Please leave your email IDs in the comment box. So if you're still around, I hope you're around, and we will send the voucher to you. Thank you very much for joining us, to all our audience today. Have a great evening, and make sure that you stay safe and stay healthy. A big thank you to our community support partner who've been supporting our initiative, Adgali, Paul Reiter, Resultix, and Chulini University for being with us, staying with us, supporting us throughout. The next session we have is on 16th of December, 6:30 p.m., Jennifer Garvey, and we're going to talk about escaping leadership mind traps to thrive in a complex world. That's an interesting one not to miss. Please make sure that you come back and join us on 16th of December. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy.